We're in the studio today with Joe Vicchiollo, and we're going to be talking about family law. I've known Joe for quite a long time, and I want her to tell me a little bit about herself.
Thanks, Barry. I've been practicing family law exclusively for about 20 years. I'm in the metropolitan area. Our offices are in Edina, although we do the 11 county metro area. Also outstate, I've been recently in Olmsted County. I've been in Duluth, just all over, but the biggest part of my practice is in the metro area.
And you cover all areas of family law?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you a few things. We're going to talk a little bit about family law. I think a lot of people who are in a situation where they need to get a family law attorney probably don't understand all that's involved in that. And I'm going to ask you a few questions, and
Sure.
we'll go through the whole process here and learn about it. So let's just start out by you telling me, under the family law umbrella, what are some of the things that would be involved or that you'd be working on under that family law umbrella?
Sure. I think that most people probably think of divorce right away when they think of family law. But actually, there are a lot other areas of family law as part of the, as you said, under the umbrella. There's prenuptial agreements and then postnuptial agreements. There's divorce. There's custody and parenting time. Third-party custody, when someone else comes into a family and receives custody of a child or children. Grandparents' rights, and paternity. Paternity is where the parties have children together or a child together, but they're not married. And that's a separate and apart from custody and parenting time in a divorce. And it looks differently, and there are different statutes related to it. There's also order for protections, which are, as you can imagine, pretty intense and stressful. And then after there's court orders, there's something that we call post-decree matters. People sometimes run into bumps 2 years after the divorce or 3 years, and then they come back and they'll hire our firm to work on those type of issues.
Well, it seems like there's a lot of different parts to that I never realized
Right.
Where it was involved under the family law umbrella. So tell me a little bit about when somebody comes in your office and they just say, I want to get a divorce. First of all, how do they decide what attorney they should hire?
Sure.
And, qualifications and that sort of thing?
Right. A good deal of my work is from personal referrals. Clients will refer potential clients. Now with the onset of online advertising, we get clients that way as well, that they'll come in the door. But when they come in, there's a whole gamut. Sometimes a person just wants to know, they're not sure that they want to move forward. And I'll stick exclusively right now just to divorce, as if that's the issue that is at hand. And they'll want to know, what will it look like? What parts are involved? Can I do this? Or, what will, they're mainly concerned if they have children about, what if they move forward with a divorce, how will a court handle deciding where a kid lives, that sort of thing. And then if they don't have kids, the financial issues. They're often worried about, if we have one household now, but now they're going to be two, how will that be supported? So they'll come in the door and they'll say, okay, can you give me general information about what it looks like? Other people will come in and they've decided, they know, and they just want to move forward. They're ready. And there's something that's called a divorce readiness scale. And that's when two parties, the husband and wife, or the wife and wife, or husband and husband, will, one person has been thinking about the divorce for a while and wants to move forward, couldn't be divorced fast enough. Well, the other spouse might be caught off guard or has been thinking about it. So I'll often assess, where are they on the divorce readiness scale? Sometimes people are 1. Some people have -2, they don't want it at all, right? And then others are 10s where they've, as I just said, they've been thinking about it and planning it for a while. And so, that's another thing that gets assessed when they come in, or we kind of talk about, and recognizing where each spouse is on that divorce readiness scale. And then I'll talk about the 3 parts of a divorce. Would you like me to talk about
Sure.
kind of those components? The first part is what you typically think about is custody and parenting time. And custody and parenting time are different. So custody, there is physical custody, obviously, where the children, the who's the physical custodian, and then there's legal custody. And legal custody has to do with 3 areas of the law, or decision making. It has to do with a child's educational background, where they're going to go to school. You'll often see, one parent wants the child to go to a private school, the other a public, or what school district they live in 2 different school districts. Where are the kids going to go? That sort of thing. And the second thing is medical decision making for legal custody. The most common we see is if you have teens or preteens and one parent wants the child to go to counseling. Well, if you have what we call joint legal custody, both parents have to agree to it. So oftentimes parents will be at loggerheads because one thinks the child's fine, the other wants counseling, and so that's another part of the legal custody. And then the third part is religious upbringing. What faith, if any, will your child be raised in? We don't see a lot of issues with religious upbringing. The 2 biggest issues are educational and then medical care. So that's the joint legal and physical custody. Underneath that is parenting time, and that really is what's most important outside of legal custody, because that's the daily care and control of where a child or children will be.
Is that sort of like the every other weekend type of
Yes,
thing you hear about?
Right, exactly. So the parenting schedule drives child support. It drives where the kid will be. In joint physical custody arrangements, you'll often see what we call a 5-2-2-5 schedule, which is Monday and Tuesday with one parent, Wednesday and Thursday with the next, and then they alternate weekends. And so that's the parenting time schedule. That doesn't have anything to do with custody, but just where the kids are.
Well, let me ask you this. How does that typically affect the kids when they're moving, particularly if they're in different school districts or different cities, within the...
Right. I've been, as I said earlier, I've been practicing about 20 years, and when you have parents who are younger who are divorcing, I've seen a real change in both mom and dad being hands-on with the kids, and so they don't want to give up any time. So they oftentimes agree to a schedule like this 5-2-2-5. I have to say, over the years, I think it's become more problematic. And I'll often say to my clients, would you want that schedule? Would you want to live in one house on Monday and Tuesday, then a different house on Wednesday and Thursday, and then alternate weekends? And just to have them kind of thinking about it, because, with your kids, that's the thing that's closest to your heart, right? And you want to make sure that they're okay. But I think sometimes parents don't realize what that might look like for their child.
With regards to that, I knew a situation where the divorced husband and wife, the kids lived in the one home and the parents would shift homes themselves.
Yes.
Have you ever seen that?
It's called nesting. Yep.
Okay.
And it's pretty common. It was popular, 5-10 years ago. It's kind of losing a little bit of its, the glamour of it, so to speak. And that's because mental health professionals are, not all, but some are saying that they don't think that's best for a kid. And I think the reason is it's confusing. If parents are divorcing, right, one parent, is going to have a home and the other parent is as well. But when you have the kids in one home and the parents shift in and out, it can be confusing for a child. Plus, there are big boundary issues, right? You're divorced, but here comes one parent back in the home. And then, it's so... as I said, it used to be a lot more popular, but I think that they're finding it's not the best case. We see it most frequently now at the beginning of a divorce when people aren't sure, am I going to stay in the house? Am I going to move someplace else? Am I going to rent something? So until those details, the final decisions for the divorce are made, that's when we see it. It's more common. But
along with that, do you find this more often nowadays where people are having difficulty financially, particularly going through a divorce, where both spouses stay in the home together but live in different levels or
Yep.
different rooms?
That's really common. After 2008, the uptick in the people staying in the house together really was, I mean, they just couldn't afford it because their houses were now underwater. There was no equity. They couldn't afford two places just with that severe economic downturn. So that we saw a lot. People will, if it's an amiable divorce, people will often do that because they want to save money and they want to wait till the very end and not waste money on renting another place or buying another home till they know what they're doing. But I think now that you see recommendations that it's better to separate than to stay in the same home, because if there's tension between the parents, it trickles down to the kids. But I have a lot of cases where one person's in the basement living and then the other person is on the main floor. But that doesn't last a long time. The tension just becomes untenable. So they try and do that. But
Particularly if they want to develop relationships
yes,
outside the marriage
right, yeah.
after they're divorced.
Yeah, exactly. But no, it's not as, I don't see it as much as I used to. But as I said, about 10 years ago or so, people just couldn't. They just didn't have the dollars, and they had lost substantial equity in their homes, and so they had to stay.
Let me shift gears just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about what the different reasons people do get divorced.
Well, I think, as you and I were talking earlier, I think most people think it's because of infidelity, and I just don't see that at all. The two most common reasons that I see people divorcing are because of mental health issues, often untreated. Someone has a personality disorder or domestic abuse, and then chemical dependency. Those are the main reasons. Sometimes you see it for financial, like they're so far apart on financial, or one person has a true spending problem and $70,000, $80,000 in credit card debt, and the other person said, I can't take it anymore, I just want to get out. But that might even swing back around to mental health issues. I think that's the biggest. That is the biggest reason that I see people deciding to move forward, because they'll come into my office and they'll say, I just can't handle them, or I can't take it. So
Well, I think that's surprising probably to most people.
Yeah.
Because I think it's surprising to me. Maybe not the dependency issues so much, because I can see that, but sometimes the mental health issues, maybe it's a little harder to see.
Right.
And their personality starts conflicting between the two, between the two of them.
Right.
And they don't see what it is necessarily, or it's undiagnosed.
Right. And I think that's really common. And I know it's popular in our, with our climate right now to use the word narcissist, to say that, someone's a
Right.
narcissist. But many of my cases, you see a true narcissist, someone who lacks the ability to take responsibility for his or her own behavior, and that other spouse who's always being blamed for things just gets to the point where they get fed up and they say, this is it. I can't put up with that anymore. Or this always surprises me within that same personality disorder, that how demeaning the narcissist is to the other spouse. I had one case where the husband did not want a divorce. In fact, he delayed hiring an attorney until right before trial, and then I think he panicked because he knew it was going forward. But he would cut out letters and put them by on side of my client's bed, right? To I love you, and that sort of thing. But then he would treat her horribly. He would say things, "You're nothing without me. When I met you, you said a junky car." Like all these awful things, and I would think, "Oh, that's going to win her back," right?
I would probably think of that as being like passive aggressive, but maybe more serious than that.
Right, exactly. And it's if you have the personality disorder, I think the person who struggles with that doesn't always recognize the behavior and the effect on the other spouse.
Now, you alluded to something earlier, and I think people are interested in knowing about this nowadays because it's different a little bit from probably state to state, because I think most family law statutes and so forth are pretty much different state to state. Some are probably common, but what about same-sex marriages?
Sure.
Talk a little bit about that in Minnesota.
Right. Well, as you know, that Minnesota law allows people of the same sex to marry, and we've done a handful of same-sex divorces. Not a lot, just because the statute was just put into place just several years ago. So it isn't as if there were 20-year marriages. We would see that in some states. Iowa had same-sex marriage long before Minnesota did. So if people move here and they're legally married in Iowa, Minnesota recognizes that. So we would have some of those. It doesn't change too much. What I see is there's more what we call premarital tracing of assets to look at, just because, as I said, that hasn't been our law in Minnesota for very long. But you're still, figuring out the same thing: the parenting time schedule between the spouses, the division of assets. Is there any spousal support? So it's
really no different.
No, it's no different.
Yeah, it's just. No. And how long has that been legal in Minnesota?
I think it was 2013.
Okay, so
I could be wrong, but I think it's 2013.
Okay, quite a while.
Yeah.
Another question that is curious is common law marriage. Mm-hmm. I think there's a misconception in this state as to common law marriage, and I've had people ask me, as an attorney, even though I don't practice in family law, I've lived with my girlfriend or my boyfriend for X amount of years, so we're actually married.
No, they're not actually. They're not actually married. So Minnesota abolished common law marriage, and I think most people think if you live together consistently for 7 years, then you are married by common law. But Minnesota doesn't recognize that. So, as I said, it was abolished in I believe the early 1940s. However, if another state recognizes common law marriage and that couple moves to Minnesota, and they're married under another state's common law, then Minnesota will recognize that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the same. It's the same thing as the same-sex when Iowa had same-sex marriage before Minnesota, right? That those marriages are recognized.
Okay. Sometimes people wonder if a wife or a husband should hire a female attorney or a male attorney. Particularly, I think it goes both ways. They ask questions about if I'm a male, should I hire a female? Or if I'm a female, should I hire a female? Tell me a little bit about what your thoughts are on that.
Right. I've had that question many times over the years, where a potential client will say to me, is it better to have a male attorney or a female attorney? It makes no difference. You just need to have a skilled attorney who, is familiar with Minnesota courts, Minnesota law, is a good negotiator, because in a divorce, you want your case to settle, right? You want to be able to figure it out with the help of with professionals, sometimes financial professionals, certainly a family law attorney. And so that's the type of attorney you want to look for, someone who knows the law, is familiar with the bench in the county they live in, and has good negotiating skills. Because if you're a horrible negotiator, if your attorney is, that's just going to drive up the cost of your divorce. You want someone who's skilled at being able to resolve it, because then you're saving money for yourself instead of paying attorney's fees.
Okay, if another thing that comes up commonly is if a couple is living together, or boyfriend, girlfriend, not married, and the woman gets pregnant and has a child, how do you determine, paternity for the male, for example?
Sure.
I mean, obviously you know who the female
right.
is obvious.
Well, pretty clear who mom is, right?
But as far as the father goes, how do you determine that? And, also, how does it affect if they're on the birth certificate or not on the birth certificate?
Right.
Sign or don't sign on it?
Right. Sometimes it's really clear. Mom will say, I've had no other partners. I know 100% that this is dad. And so in Minnesota, if you sign what's called a recognition of parentage, and if you're not married in Minnesota and have a child, at the hospital, a form will be brought to you called a recognition of parentage. And that both parents are signing it, saying, we acknowledge that this is mom and this is dad. And under Minnesota law, dad is then what we call adjudicated the father. It doesn't mean that he has any parenting time rights or custody rights. It just means that he is the legal father. So that is really common. If you don't have, if you're not sure, then you can ask for genetic testing. We had a case recently where mom and dad were both married to other people. Mom knew who the dad was, and dad, biological dad didn't want to, fess up to it, right? So we had to bring an action and ask the court to order him to undergo genetic testing to show that he was dad, and he was.
Is that common for a judge to almost always okay that?
Yes, I can't think of a case where genetic testing was requested and it was denied. They want to figure out who the father is. But we don't see that very often. Most people know.
Okay.
They know. So
What about where, a situation where the boyfriend or husband, like you talked about, assumes they're the father.
right.
And the mother doesn't want to say or doesn't know for sure.
Right.
How does that conflict with maybe who the real father is and who the, deemed father is? The person who basically, the boyfriend currently who says it's my son or
Right.
daughter.
Well, you have to be careful because there's a time frame to say that you're not dad, right? And oftentimes it will lapse, right? That time period to challenge to say whether you're dad or not. So if a child is born, if the parties are married and a child is born, it is deemed that husband is the father, right? So that's just, and so if he's not, he has to bring an action challenging and saying, I'm not dad, I want genetic testing, that sort of thing. Usually what happens is that 3-year time period lapses and it's too late for dad to challenge it, so then he'll be deemed the legal father, even if he's not the biological father. And a lot of times, I've seen in cases that the father, the legal father, not the biological father, doesn't care because he's been living with the kid, loves the kid, is seeing that child as his own, even though he's not biological. It's kind of akin to adoption, right? When parents adopt a child, right? They're not the biological parents, but they're mom and dad, and they're the legal parents, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alluding a little bit to child support. Situation where woman and girlfriend, boyfriend, presumably are in a relationship. 19 years later, 20 years later, the boyfriend finds out that the daughter, son is his because they've talked about it after the fact, or maybe they knew about it earlier. But maybe the mother is remarried or is married. Okay.
Right.
And what happens with a child support situation if it's,
Passed.
At what age, first of all, is child support paid
Sure.
till? And then, what happens if it's passed?
Right. So if child support, there's and I'll leave the divorce part. I'll just kind of focus on the paternity part of it. So if a court has the ability in any kind of custody action to order child support. And so if the parents aren't married and we know that dad is the legal father, if he signed a recognition of parentage, that recognition of parentage gives the county the authority to seek child support from dad. If dad never signed a recognition of parentage, then the county has to go through that whole genetic testing and so on, and more hoops to jump through. So as what the law says is that as a parent always has an obligation to support a child. So right away. Now, let's say 2 years have gone by, the couple is living together, everything is just peachy, right? And then the couple breaks up and they're living in separate homes. If the mom wants to seek child support from dad and they have not been married, under Minnesota law, she can go back 2 years. So that dad could be on the hook for child support for the 2 previous years. So let's say the kid is 6, right? And they break up. Mom can't go back 6 years, but she can go back 2 years and have asked the court to order child support.
And what's the age that you have to typically pay child support up to?
Until the child turns 18 or is emancipated, which we think of graduation from high school, whichever is later.
Oh, okay, so graduation from high school actually counts.
Yep, exactly. So if a kid turns 18 in October of his or her senior year, the obligor, the person paying the child support, pays until that child graduates from high school.
What about a situation where, do you see where a divorce situation or an unmarried situation that the mother, for example, who will not get remarried
Oh,
in
for
order-
spousal?
because they don't, because of spousal maintenance or potentially, I don't know, child support, I don't know.
Right. So child support is not affected by remarriage and the new spouse's income. So oftentimes people will worry, well, if I get remarried and my spouse, will they now look at her income or his income for figuring out my child support obligation? And they don't. Child support is based on the gross income of each parent. And you also take into factor what are the costs of the health insurance premiums and dental premiums and who's paying them. And if there's child care, who's paying that. And we have a calculator from DHS, and you just plug in the numbers and it kicks out a number, what your child support obligation is. Now,
So it's pretty straightforward from
very straightforward.
case to case.
Yep. And in Minnesota, there was an overhaul of the child support in August of 2018, where we used to be in what we called percentages of parenting time. If you had your child 0 to 10% of overnights, 10 to 45%, and then the third category was 45.1, and then the calculator kicked it out. Now, the law changed in August, and we're still kind of handling this because it's fairly recent, where you literally count every single overnight. So you have to plug into the calculator, out of 365 nights, how many does one parent have and how many does the other? So that's kind of shifted the law. So as I said, that's because it's such recent law, we're really getting more cases with that and seeing that a little bit more. So not affected at all by remarriage. And
Child support is not.
Child support is not. Gross
So-
income of the parents is all you look at.
Spousal support's different, right?
Absolutely different. So in spousal maintenance, that is, some people think of it as alimony. And there are a variety of statutory factors of whether, and that's in a marriage, that is not in a paternity matter. So it is only in a divorce situation. So when you're looking at spousal maintenance, there are statutory factors the court has to look at in deciding how much spousal maintenance, who's going to get it, that sort of thing. So things such as the length of the marriage, the standard of living during the marriage, did one party work to accumulate assets, what's the educational background of the person seeking spousal maintenance, what is earning capacity. And I've done probably over 100 trials over my career, and by far I've done the most is spousal maintenance because there's not a clear rule. And even from judge to judge, one judge might be more pro-spousal maintenance and one less, even though we have our statutes, because they can be subjective. You might say, well, this person needs 4 years to get back into the workforce and go back to school and get training to be updated. And one judge might give that person more time and give spousal, okay, I'll award spousal for 4 years until that person completes college and can get a job, and then we'll look at it again. Other people will say, nope, the law says both parties are expected to work 40 hours a week. Okay, person asking for spousal, go out and get a job now. There's plenty of work. There's no reason. So you have to mitigate what you're asking for in spousal maintenance by working before, you can say this is the final amount. But there is an expectation. And that's within the last 5 years. There are a couple of cases that came out. Passelt and Powell were cases that said, look, obligee, person getting the spousal, we expect you to contribute to your expenses as well. And for some people, it might be part-time because that's all they have the capacity. It could be a job where they're earning $24,000 or $25,000 a year, or it could be where they're, one parent was out of the workforce and it's going to take a little bit of retraining and they're going to be at $100,000, and so those are all different factors. That is affected if you remarry, because under Minnesota law, if you remarry, your spousal maintenance ends.
Is that like a post-decree thing you were talking about earlier?
Yep.
Typically.
Mm-hmm.
How? Let me ask you this, before I forget and want to know, how does somebody know actually somebody got remarried? I mean, can it be hidden, sort of?
It could be. It doesn't happen very often because usually there are kids, if they have kids together, they talk about it. But they could hide it.
They could secretly
Yes,
get married.
they could secretly get married and never say anything. But if they're residing together. Now, a few years ago, some new statutes came out regarding cohabitation. In Minnesota, if you cohabitate, spousal does not end as it does if you remarry. So what people would do is they would, somebody paying spousal maintenance, and then, the other side would be living with their significant other and collecting a spousal check, which makes the other spouse a little crazy, right? But so the law, they added statutes that talk about if you cohabitate, it's a basis to go back and modify spousal maintenance.
Okay.
So you can go back. So it's not an automatic, it's going to end, but you can go back and say, look, judge, she's been living with this guy.
His income is, let's look into his income. I believe he or she has certain amount of income.
Yep, right. They're sharing expenses. And so, and I'm not trying to be gender biased. I'm just,
as an example.
Yeah, just it's easier to say he or she. So,
because they might eliminate that someday,
yeah,
right?
right. Well, I've had cases, I represent the husband, and he got a hefty spousal amount, so, but typically, I have to be honest, right now I see more females receive spousal, but it's changing where I have more male clients who are as well. But it's just, so, as I said, I'm not trying to be gender biased. It's just what I do.